Good day, everyone. Today is our first episode for the podcast Across the Frontier. Today's topic will be the second Trump America. Now, first of all, I would like to give an introduction of who we are. Our mission across the frontier is to establish a platform where the youth can voice out their opinions and thoughts about topics ranging from politics, economics, the legal system, to even history. We invite students and working professionals alike to join our podcast as a guest speaker to share their thoughts and ideas, giving you a voice. So, to briefly introduce myself, my name is Julius. I'll be your host for today, alongside with Evan, who is my co-host. Now, both of us are A-level students, currently in pre-university. Now, I'm joined with Evan here, who is a member of Team Malaysia for the International Economics Olympiad of 2024 in Hong Kong and was the champion of the 2023 Malaysian Public Policy Competition. I'm also joined today by Benjamin, who is from Switzerland, who is the two-time silver medalist in the International Economics Olympiad from Team Switzerland. So, without further ado, let's get straight to the point. Now, the big question, the million-dollar question that we all need to ask ourselves is how did Trump win? How did he, a convicted felon, and also a person who had lost the 2020 presidential campaign, not to mention led an insurrection on the Capitol on 6 January, become the 47th president of the United States of America? So, Benjamin, tell me, what's your opinion? How did Trump manage to pull it off? What are his strengths?
Well, I think people are quite stupid in the US. So I think what they see is they have two 4-year terms that they view as like individual entities. So they think that like 2016 to 2020 was good because there was no major geopolitical stuff and like the economy was decently well. And then they see like 2020 to 2024, they see everything's gone to shit, war everywhere. And so they think about the variable that changed. So they think the president changed, so they blame everything basically on the presidency. So they think Trump was a better president because the situation was better in the country and everywhere. So now they re-elected Trump again.
That's a fair point. That's a fair take. How about Evan? What do you think are Trump's strengths? What do you think actually managed to let him win the presidency?
Mm. Well, thank you, Julius. That's a really good question right there. So for me, I think that one of Trump's strengths, especially, and it also goes to show a lot with his campaign manager, would be the extremely strong rhetoric that he had, like tailored to the working class. So I think to sort of echo what Bernie Sanders said, like in his like press statement, at the results of the election, is that also similar to like what like Benjamin said that like people are happy with like the status quo, and with the status quo being inherited by the current like by the incumbent with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and the fact that I think Harris herself has said that she in a way would not really separate herself from like the Biden presidency. There wasn't anything she would change. I think it's because of that Trump's strength of being different to the Democratic Party and specifically tailoring a response to the working class, to the everyday people who are more focused on issues like the economy, the border, and the election. I think this promise of like a new radical change is what especially appealed to voters, and it's definitely growing. His base has grown a lot since the ever since 2016, 2020, and now like there. And once again, the American people have like shown their support incredibly, and you can see that with the popular vote.
So, Benjamin and I both agree with you, Evan. I think to add on here, I think we can talk also about Harris' weakness, like what ultimately cost her. And I think we need to look straight at the very fact that initially it was supposed to be Joe Biden. That was supposed to be the presidential candidate. And only last minute in July, when Biden had this horrendous performance in the debate against Trump, that Harris only joined in. And so she only had 107 days to actually campaign when Trump literally had from the very start of the beginning. So he had a head start in the very way. And also, I think we should also look at the fundamentals of the party, of the Democratic Party, and like their target group, who they focused on. And I think a lot of people, a lot of American, working class Americans especially, they kind of saw the Democratic Party as out of touch. I think they saw it as because like it was endorsed heavily by these celebrities like Taylor Swift and all them, and a lot of Americans, like especially working class Americans, think that it's kind of like an elitist group, something that They are simply unaffected by the inflation, by high cost of living, and all that. That's definitely one key point that we got to look at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree, and I also think that's a global phenomenon at this point. Like, for example, in Japan, the ruling party that ruled for 20 years was voted out now. In Germany, the chancellor just fired the finance minister. Like, and
Yeah.
like the right wing extremist party is at like 20 to 30%, depending on where. So I think it's like a phenomenon that's growing worldwide with the economy being sort of weak, like inflation high, and everyone's sort of being disillusioned with the people who have been in power the last like 10, 20 years.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, bro. Definitely agree on that. Also, especially like I think also like a lot of people associate Kamala Harris with Joe Biden, and
Yep,
Joe Biden, I would say, didn't do a great job, especially in terms of inflation. Like even though like towards 2024, he managed to cut back the inflation that was rampant in 2022, 2023, but a lot of that didn't translate to the average American in terms of cost of living. And so I think that by getting Kamala Harris, who was the vice president under Biden, they equate her to Biden. So, and a lot of them simply don't want the same thing because they don't like the same thing. So they want something new. And that's what Trump seems to offer.
exactly.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's a good breakdown. I think. Do you have anything to add, Evan?
Mm. Yeah, I think speaking to like one of your points, what you said there about how like despite even with President Biden's like Inflation Reduction Act and supposedly and how those metrics seem to be improving in the economy, it kind of like goes to show like for example we as economics students, at least students of economics, we at least it's important to know that even if like the economy's metrics like GDP and other aspects seem to be going up, if regular people can't feel it, it almost as if there's no much real impact there. And just to add on one little quick fact as well, is that given that how usually the vice president usually given like portfolios to manage under the president, and Harris was given the border to manage, I think that fact that a lot of people are dissatisfied with the border, and since they, in many ways, regardless of her performance, they equate Harris as the one being charged of the border, and the border hasn't been doing terrifically well. I think there was what the Trump campaign was able to exploit it quite well for their benefit in the campaign. So yeah, passing back on to you.
Yeah, that's a good take, Evan. Very good take. Yep. So now we'll conclude with our analysis on the Trump's victory, and now we will look at the effect on the world economy. So, Benjamin, tell me, what do you think about Trump's economic plan, which, from what we understand, is a very protectionist policy, includes very high tariffs on imports, on all non-American goods, essentially, even up to 60% tariffs on Chinese-made goods. So, what do you think will be the impact on the American consumer, along with, say, for example, the European consumer?
Well, I think it's gonna be pretty much a bad deal for everyone. Because, first of all, the tariffs, they will just be passed on to the consumer, so the consumer will have less options, less innovations in America. Another thing is that whenever these big tariffs come out, oftentimes what happens is the opposite country, so in this case China, will just do counter tariffs on American goods like iPhones or whatever. So what will happen is just they will further separate from each other, and at the end of the day, nobody will really benefit because the benefits of trades are lost.
Yeah, that's a good take. And you, Evan, what do you think?
Hmm. I, for me, I would have to agree as well. Like, I think many of Trump's supporters, like, even though, like, I would say, like, many of Trump's supporters, even those, like, who quite agree with his rhetoric about a strong economy and all that, would kind of agree that tariffs, while putting America first, it's quite unlikely that, yeah, tariffs will be passed on to the consumers and things like that. And in many ways, there's some speculation on whether or not the Supreme Court could actually stop Trump from implementing their tariffs, and whether or not any support from within the party would be privy to reduce the amount of the impact of their tariffs in order to, like, I guess, allow Trump to save face and his reputation about being a strong economy. But yeah, I mean, from an international perspective and from an American perspective, like for example, firms like Steve Madden is really diversifying their business away from China in preparation for that, going to other countries for manufacturing. And I think in the end, it will just kind of it it may have some benefits, but it may not turn. out in the way that maybe Trump is expecting. At least that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's a good take, Evan. Not to mention how the fact that, to add on to what you said, also the fact that there's a break from the Supreme Court, possibly, that we also got to take into account the Senate, which is already being controlled by the Republicans, and the House, which is currently in contention, but it's likely that the Republicans would win. So essentially, you would have basically virtually all Republican. You have the presidency, the Senate, and the House, all Republican, which is going to be crazy, man. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be like there would barely be any check and balance. And the best bet would, I guess, would be Supreme Court. And even then, the Supreme Court is also very conservative because quite a number of the judges were nominated by Trump. So that's a very interesting thing to see. So now, to add on about the tariffs, one example would be that Trump imposed a 50% tariff on imports of washing machines in 2018 during his first presidency, and researchers estimate the value of washing machines jumped by around 12%, as a direct consequence, equivalent to $86 per unit. And that US consumers paid about $1.5 billion extra a year in total for these products. So this is just one small example of the trade war, especially the tariffs that Trump could eventually implement. And so it would be actually very harmful. Now, we will look into the impact, especially on Europe. So, according to Goldman Sachs, Europe could face a 0.5% hit to GDP from a second Trump presidency. And along with the fact that we know that Trump has a very patchy relationship with NATO, North American Treaty Organization, sorry, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, believing the other European states are not paying their fair share. So, Benjamin, since you're in Switzerland, tell us, what do you think about Europe's relationship with Trump?
Well, I feel like more and more throughout these 4 years, if they play out like Trump has said before, I feel like Europe will sort of distance itself a bit from America because they're also getting harmed by these policies. If Ukraine doesn't get any more aid um, Trump, Europe is going to be in danger, and they're going to look elsewhere for trade. And I think like the one place they're going to trade more with is China. So I feel like America's just losing its grip on Europe and then on the good relationship and the friendship it has with Europe. If NATO's weakening and the trade is weakening and so on. So I think that Europe's gonna have to reorient itself if it wants to stay at the position that it's currently at.
That's fair. That's a good take. Yeah, especially when Trump signals that he's going to bring an end within 2 days or one day, he said, to the war in Ukraine, but he didn't specify why. And so apparently I saw a news report recently that he has clearly called Zelensky and Putin. So it leaves a lot to say, like who's going to benefit in terms of whether it's Zelensky or Putin, and if it is Russia that benefits the most. Say, for example, Trump lets Russia keep all of their territorial gains, then there'll be a very, very dangerous precedent, a very dangerous scenario for Europe, especially through a Russian win in the war and could possibly escalate even further. So that's a very
Yeah.
important thing that we should take note, and hopefully that Trump would be able to settle a good deal which would maintain Ukrainian sovereignty and peace in Europe.
But also, it's not clear yet how he's gonna do any of these things. Like, he's not the guy who can just say, "Yeah, the war ends now," and then the war ends. Like Ukraine's still a sovereign country, Russia is a sovereign country. Like, he's not just there and able to do all the decisions by himself.
Yep, that's true. So hopefully Trump, cleans up his foreign policy knowledge and manage to bring peace. Hope for the best. Now we'll be looking at Asia. So we'll be looking at the impact of Trump's economic policy on Asia. So the first country we'd like to look is China. So no brainer here. So China. So there will be likely be another trade war, Trump against China, with Trump promising, as mentioned earlier, 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. And considering China's dominance in trade, in production, how the fact that so many countries rely on cheap Chinese goods, which are produced, which lower their cost of production, so to keep prices stable. So, Evan, tell me, what do you think about this proposed tariff on China?
I think we mostly covered it just now overall, but I'd say that yeah, it will be quite retaliatory in nature. I mean, the the Chinese head of state has mentioned that they will accept. I mean, they accept the people's decision, but I guess it will be more like a mixed bag, like towards like who's in charge now of the election. I think the 60% tariffs on Chinese good is quite extreme, even from like an economic standpoint. I mean, it might as we mentioned, it might like shift more manufacturing towards the US, which might raise more prices and things like that. But ultimately, maybe Trump's attempts may be more to reduce reliance on China as a whole. And even if he's putting America first, maybe in a way he might be expecting like a more diversification from China itself. So to other like Southeast Asian countries to for manufacturing and other means like that. So I think that's why I can imagine for that.
Okay, good take, Evan. So now we've seen the Chinese impact, and now considering we are a Malaysian-based podcast, we'll look at the impact on Malaysia. So interestingly, though, after through my research, I found now that actually Malaysia does actually have a stance to benefit from the trade war, potential trade war between the U.S. and China. Because taking precedence from the first trade war back then, Malaysia actually benefited through more investment and greater MNCs investing into Malaysia because they want to divert their resources from China into Malaysia due to Chinese geopolitical instability. So, considering Malaysia is a neutral country, and also the fact that Malaysia is under ASEAN, which generally takes a neutral stance between China and the US, so a lot of we can expect that a lot of international corporations and investments would channel into Malaysia, which can in turn fuel jobs and the Malaysian economy. So that's actually a plus point for Malaysia. So hopefully we can actually benefit. How about you, Evan? What do you think?
I mean, well, first of all, I guess regardless of the election results, our prime minister has congratulated the President Trump on his remarkable political comeback in the U.S. And yeah, once again, the U.S. still remains Malaysia's largest source of foreign investment and quite a critical player in the Asia Pacific region. So I think Malaysia, they would still hope that the US would still be able to engage well with Southeast Asia. And given that Malaysia's like stance, like of being quite independent in that sense, even though Malaysia has extended a lot of foreign diplomacy towards China, with our prime minister even visiting China as well for diplomatic negotiations, and even quite heavily proposing to join like the BRICS economic bloc. Yeah, so I think overall, what will Malaysia quite benefit on that is to yeah, if the US can still work towards Malaysia, still work alongside and have such good relationships with Malaysia, I think it'll be interesting to see how this election will turn out.
That's a good take, Evan. Interesting point you mentioned. Benjamin, do you have anything to add about Asia?
Well, I'm obviously not the expert in this conversation, but I do think that maybe Trump shifts away from like America first need to get manufacturing back to America to just we have to find manufacturing elsewhere than just China, you know, because there's a lot of countries that produce cheaply in Asia, and in the US it's going to be hard to find people who will build electronics for an affordable salary, you know. So maybe it's also beneficial to countries like India, Vietnam, or whatever who have cheap manufacturing, who then will gain substantial business from these tariffs. It's possible.
Yep, that's a fact. Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you, Benjamin. It's very possible, especially developing Asian countries. So, as you mentioned, Vietnam, Indonesia, all of these neutral, fastly growing countries that produce cheap labor and cheap products definitely stand a chance to benefit. So, now that's a wrap for our economic take. So, We will conclude with an overall take on the Trump and versus Harris. So, Evan, tell me, are you happy with the election? Do you think that Trump is still the better candidate than Harris, or do you think Harris should have won?
I mean, a question of whether it's better is, I think, beyond what I can say as a student in Malaysia versus the average US citizen. But I will say that Trump's win was incredibly it was a really decisive victory, I'd say. Like for me, I during the when the election results were being tallied, I myself hadn't really decided who would win, but I did have a feeling that, or I even bet the fact that Trump was likely to win the popular vote. And the fact that he did by quite staggering numbers, mind you, plus the sheer amount of electoral votes that he's gained also compared to the 2020 elections, I think in a way the American people have spoken that um, they are quite looking for change. And the question of whether one is the better candidate is still to see from there.
That's interesting. So, tell me, can you explain further, Evan? What made you think he would win the popular vote?
Hmm. Well, I'd say for me, the reason why I thought he would win the popular vote is kind of like what I've been seeing for the past 4 5 years, even especially with like the rise of, I guess, with conservatism and anti-wokeness, like trends like happening across the US being more prevalent on social media. When, for example, in 2016, when it was quite normal for, I guess, citizens to express their thoughts, they will be like subject to things like cancel culture or other I guess public discrimination against in that sense. I think it's sort of lessening now. More and more people are be willing to open about that. And I think that was ever since Trump won the election in 2016. So I think that shift and people being more open to spreading, and I guess more, I guess, right-leaning commentators visiting US campuses, for example. I think Charlie Kirk was an interesting example, quite prevalent across social media. We've been seeing visiting campuses and engaging with voters on those university campuses. For me, I think that was my feeling, that like seeing his crowd turn up and seeing how a lot of these people are engaging with them and seeing, I guess, a lot more support that's not being hidden. I think that was why I felt he was going to win the popular vote.
That's very fair. I agree with you. And also, I like to add the fact that Trump kind of assembled like a star-studded old G team. Like out of the fact he managed to get Elon Musk, Robert F. Kennedy, which was a shocker because, as we all know, the Kennedys are basically royalty of the Democratic Party. So Elon Musk, RFK Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy. So all these great, and also Tulsi Gabbard, who's from the Democratic Party. So all these people from different fields all coming together and simply advocating for Trump, along with the fact that Elon Musk gave him I think $90 million. I'm not too sure, but a lot of money to Trump just funding his campaign. So I think this also was, and the fact that a lot of them have their own followers, so a lot of these actually managed to like tilt the balance, especially for young men, who a lot of them listen to people like Elon Musk or Joe Rogan, for example. Okay, so Benjamin, tell me, what's your take? Do you think that Trump was still the better candidate, or do you think Harris should have won?
Well, I personally believe that Harris would have been better, just because I don't like a lot of Trump's policies. I don't like a lot of people that support Trump. Like, for example, Elon Musk, I'm not the biggest fan of. However, um, if Trump can bring like good things to America, if he can fix a lot of the issues that are on the table that are actually real issues, I feel like it might be a good thing that he won. And if not, maybe the American voters will see that he was just uh, lying a lot, and will for that punish the Republican Party in the next election in 2028. So I think it's either way, it's a bit of a win-win. So like he has a chance to prove that he can actually solve all these problems as easily as he always says. And if not, then we maybe have hopefully they get a really good president from the Democratic Party in 2028. That's my take.
Hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Benjamin. And I think, yeah, adding on to your point, the fact that, I mean, while the House of Representatives election is still quite still contested, if, let's say, hypothetically, the House does become a Republican majority and he has the trifecta to, I guess, have no like restrictions towards implementing policy, it will be quite interesting to see, like, if he is able to push his policies without any restriction or stuff like that, and no, I guess, accountability from another side. It's going to be interesting because I think a lot of, I guess, people from the Republican Party would say that, I guess, when Trump was elected before, that, let's say, the House of Representatives was like a Democratic majority, their policies wouldn't be able to be fulfilled. So if the House does become a Republican majority and they're able to implement their policies, but their policies hasn't shown results, then it will be quite devastating, I'd say. So it will be really interesting to watch.
Yep, that's a fair take. Okay, so that wraps up our podcast today. We have basically looked through and then analyzed through the reasons for Trump's success, along with the economic effect of a Trump presidency. So thank you very much for watching today's episode of A Second Trump America. I thank you all, and I hope that you will tune in to whatever future podcast that we will broadcast soon. And I hope all of you have a good day. Thank you. Bye bye.